I never imagined that being publicly humiliated and fired in front of my entire company would become the moment that launched me into the career of my dreams. When my boss dragged me out of our annual retreat while the CEO was speaking, claiming I was a disruptive influence on the team, I thought my professional life was over. What I didn't know was that 3 minutes later, that same CEO would stop mid-presentation and ask the room where her partner for our biggest deal had gone. The look on my boss's face when he realized what he'd done was worth every second of embarrassment I'd endured. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Jennifer Carter, though everyone calls me Jen, and until 6 months ago, I was the Senior Business Development Manager at TechFlow Solutions here in Austin, Texas. At 32, I had spent 4.5 years building my reputation as the person who could close deals that others couldn't even get in the door for. I was the one clients asked for by name. I was the one who had brought in over $1 million in new business in the past 18 months alone. And I was especially proud of the relationship I'd cultivated with our biggest potential client, RetailMax Corporation. TechFlow Solutions was a mid-sized software consulting firm that specialized in helping retail companies modernize their inventory management and customer analytics systems. We weren't the biggest player in the Austin tech scene, but we had carved out a solid niche working with regional retail chains that needed sophisticated technology solutions, but couldn't afford the massive consulting firms from Dallas or Houston. It was exactly the kind of company where someone like me could make a real impact, where individual relationships and personal expertise actually mattered. I'd joined TechFlow straight out of my MBA program, starting as a junior business analyst and working my way up through pure determination and results. While other people networked at happy hours and played office politics, I was studying our clients' businesses, learning their pain points, and developing solutions that actually solved their problems. I spent weekends visiting retail stores to understand how inventory flowed, talked to store managers about their daily challenges, and built relationships with decision-makers who appreciated someone who took the time to understand their world. The retail industry was going through massive changes. Online shopping was forcing brick-and-mortar stores to completely rethink how they managed inventory, tracked customer preferences, and integrated their physical and digital experiences. Companies that had been successful for decades using old-school methods suddenly found themselves struggling to compete with more agile competitors who had embraced modern technology from day one. That's where TechFlow came in, and that's where I found my calling. My biggest success story was RetailMax Corporation, a regional chain with over 150 stores across Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. When I first approached them 2 years ago, they were hemorrhaging money because their inventory system was so outdated, they literally didn't know what products they had in which stores at any given time. They were constantly running out of popular items while being overstocked with things nobody wanted. Their customer data was scattered across incompatible systems, making it impossible to understand shopping patterns or predict demand. The initial contract I negotiated with RetailMax was for $800,000 to overhaul their inventory management system. It was a significant deal for TechFlow, but more importantly, it was the beginning of a relationship that had grown into something much bigger. As we successfully delivered on that first project, RetailMax's executives began trusting me with increasingly strategic conversations about their long-term technology needs. Over the past year, those conversations had evolved into discussions about a revolutionary partnership opportunity. RetailMax wanted to develop a completely new retail analytics platform that would integrate inventory management, customer behavior tracking, and predictive analytics in ways that didn't exist in the current market. Instead of just buying software from TechFlow, they wanted to co-develop this platform as partners, sharing both the development costs and the eventual profits from licensing it to other retailers. The numbers were staggering. The initial development contract alone was worth $2.8 million over 3 years. But the real opportunity was in the long-term partnership. If we could successfully develop and market this platform, TechFlow could move from being a mid-sized consulting firm to being a major player in the retail technology space. We were talking about potential revenues in the tens of millions, with TechFlow holding a significant equity stake in the platform we'd help create. I had been the primary relationship manager for RetailMax from the beginning, and their executives had made it clear they wanted me personally involved in this partnership. David Park, their chief technology officer, had told me directly that RetailMax's willingness to move forward with such an ambitious collaboration was based largely on their confidence in my ability to manage the relationship and ensure successful delivery. In their minds, I wasn't just TechFlow's representative. I was their trusted partner who happened to work for TechFlow. This level of client confidence should have been exactly what any manager would want from their team member. It should have made my boss, Robert Hayes, proud to have someone on his team who commanded such respect from our most important client. Instead, it seemed to make him increasingly uncomfortable and defensive. Rob had been promoted to regional sales director about 2 years ago, around the same time I was building the RetailMax relationship. He was technically my manager, though most of my day-to-day work involved direct collaboration with senior leadership and clients rather than traditional supervisory oversight. Rob was competent enough at the administrative aspects of his role, managing budgets and coordinating between different teams, but he had never been a rainmaker like me. His background was more in operations than business development, and it showed in how he approached client relationships. Where I saw the RetailMax partnership as an opportunity to transform TechFlow's entire business model, Rob seemed to view it as a threat to his position. He frequently made comments about the importance of team cohesion and following proper reporting structures. He would insert himself into client communications where his involvement added no value, seemingly just to remind everyone that he was technically the senior person on the team. Most frustratingly, he had started taking credit for the RetailMax relationship in his reports to senior leadership, describing it as a team effort under his guidance rather than acknowledging the individual relationships and expertise that had made it possible. The situation became more complicated when Rob's son Tyler graduated from college with a business degree and joined TechFlow as a junior analyst. Tyler was a nice enough kid, bright and eager to learn, but he had zero experience in retail, technology, consulting, or business development. Despite this, Rob began pushing for Tyler to be included in important client meetings and strategic discussions, framing it as professional development and cross-training. I didn't mind mentoring Tyler or helping him learn the business. What bothered me was Rob's obvious intention to position his son as a key contributor to the RetailMax partnership, despite Tyler having no prior involvement in building the relationship or understanding the complex technical and business issues involved. During client meetings, Rob would make comments like, "Tyler has some great insights about retail technology trends," or "We're developing Tyler's expertise in this area, so he can provide additional support for the partnership." RetailMax's executives were polite about Tyler's presence, but I could tell they were confused about why this inexperienced junior analyst was suddenly being presented as part of their core team. David Park pulled me aside after one meeting and asked diplomatically whether Tyler would be taking over some of my responsibilities, expressing gentle concern about continuity and relationship management. I assured him that I remained their primary contact and that Tyler was simply observing to learn about the business. The tensions came to a head 3 months ago during our quarterly business review. Rob presented the RetailMax partnership progress to TechFlow's senior leadership, including our CEO, Kate Morrison, who had flown in from the San Francisco headquarters for the meeting. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Throughout his presentation, Rob consistently used phrases like, "Our team secured this opportunity," and "We've built strong relationships with RetailMax leadership," without ever specifically acknowledging my role in developing and managing the partnership. When Kate asked detailed questions about RetailMax's technical requirements and partnership expectations, Rob fumbled through vague responses before finally saying, "Jen can probably provide more specifics on the technical details." It was obvious to everyone in the room that he didn't understand the nuances of the deal he was taking credit for. Kate made a note on her pad and moved on, but I caught her glancing at me with what looked like understanding. After the meeting, Kate approached me directly and asked if I had a few minutes to chat. We walked to her temporary office, and she asked me to give her my perspective on the RetailMax partnership, from the initial relationship building through the current partnership negotiations. I provided a comprehensive overview, including the challenges we'd overcome, the key relationships I'd developed, and the specific technical and business requirements that made this partnership opportunity unique. Kate listened intently, asking thoughtful questions that demonstrated she understood both the technical complexity and the business significance of what we were building with RetailMax. At the end of our conversation, she made a comment that stuck with me. "It's clear that RetailMax sees you as their primary partner in this relationship. That's exactly the kind of client confidence we need to build TechFlow's reputation in the BI market." Keep doing what you're doing, Jen. This partnership could be transformational for our entire company. I left that conversation feeling validated and energized. For the first time, I felt like senior leadership truly understood my contributions and the potential impact of the work I'd been doing. What I didn't anticipate was how threatened Rob would feel by my direct conversation with Kate, or how that threat would manifest in increasingly problematic behavior over the following months. Rob began micromanaging my client communications, insisting that all emails to RetailMax be copied to him and that all meeting invitations include him as an attendee. He started questioning my strategic decisions and second-guessing approaches that had been working successfully for months. Most frustratingly, he began scheduling competing meetings and commitments during times when I was supposed to be working on RetailMax projects, then expressing disappointment that I wasn't able to focus adequately on other clients. The situation reached a breaking point 2 weeks before our annual company retreat. RetailMax had invited me to present their partnership proposal to their board of directors, a significant honor that reflected their confidence in both the project and my ability to represent it effectively. This presentation would essentially be the final step before moving forward with the multi-million-dollar partnership agreement. When I told Rob about the invitation, his response was immediate and negative. "I don't think it's appropriate for you to be presenting to their board without senior leadership involvement," he said. "This is too important a relationship for TechFlow to have represented by just one person, regardless of your history with them." I explained that RetailMax had specifically requested me for this presentation, that they wanted to hear directly from the person who would be managing the partnership implementation, and that adding additional presenters might actually confuse the message. Rob insisted that either he should present alongside me or that we should request Kate Morrison to join the presentation to show appropriate senior leadership commitment. After several uncomfortable conversations, we reached a compromise where Rob would attend the presentation, but I would handle the actual presentation and Q&A session. RetailMax's executives were polite about the arrangement, though David Park privately expressed some confusion about why Rob was attending what they had envisioned as a working session with their primary TechFlow contact. The presentation itself went exceptionally well. RetailMax's board was engaged and enthusiastic about the partnership opportunity, asking detailed questions about implementation timelines, success metrics, and long-term scalability. I was able to answer their questions comprehensively, drawing on the deep understanding I'd developed of their business needs and technical requirements over 2 years of collaboration. Rob contributed very little to the presentation itself, primarily nodding along and making generic supportive comments. However, after the formal presentation ended and we were having informal conversations with board members, he began positioning himself as the strategic architect behind the partnership, describing it as an initiative he'd been developing for the past year and crediting the success to his team's collaborative approach. I watched uncomfortably as Rob essentially rewrote the history of the RetailMax relationship for people who had lived through that history and knew exactly who had been their primary contact and relationship manager. RetailMax's executives were too polite to contradict him directly, but I could see the confusion and mild annoyance in their expressions. The most awkward moment came when one board member asked Rob about specific technical implementation challenges we'd discussed in previous meetings. Rob clearly had no knowledge of these conversations and gave a vague response about having his technical team analyze the requirements. The board member then turned to me and said, "Jen, you've been handling these technical discussions with David's team. What's your assessment of the implementation complexity?" As I provided a detailed technical response, I noticed Rob's jaw tightening. He was realizing that his attempt to claim credit was making it obvious to everyone in the room that he wasn't actually familiar with the details of the partnership he was claiming to have architected. Despite the awkwardness, RetailMax's board voted unanimously to move forward with the partnership, with final contract negotiations to begin immediately after TechFlow's annual retreat. David Park walked us to the elevator after the meeting and said, "Jen, excellent presentation today. We're excited to move forward with you as our primary partner on this initiative." The phrase, "with you as our primary partner," was clearly intentional, a diplomatic way of acknowledging that RetailMax saw me, not Rob, as their key relationship. I thanked him and assured him that I was equally excited about the partnership opportunity. During the drive back to TechFlow's offices, Rob was mostly silent, occasionally making comments about the importance of maintaining proper client boundaries and not letting client relationships become too personal. I tried to address his concerns directly, explaining that strong personal relationships were exactly what allowed us to build the trust necessary for ambitious partnerships like this one. But he didn't seem interested in the conversation. That afternoon, Rob sent an email to Kate Morrison and other senior leadership summarizing the RetailMax board presentation. His email focused primarily on RetailMax's enthusiasm for the partnership and their confidence in TechFlow's capabilities. Without mentioning the specific role I'd played in the presentation or the board's obvious preference for working with me directly, I didn't respond to Rob's email or try to correct his version of events. I'd learned that trying to compete with him for credit usually backfired and made me look petty or self-promoting. Instead, I focused on preparing for the final contract, negotiations that would take place after our company retreat, trusting that results would speak louder than office politics. Our annual company retreat was scheduled for the following week at Lake Travis Resort, about 45 minutes outside Austin. The retreat was always a significant event for TechFlow, bringing together employees from all our offices for 3 days of team building, strategic planning, and recognition. Kate Morrison would be attending, along with other senior executives from the San Francisco headquarters, making it an important opportunity for visibility and relationship building. I was looking forward to the retreat for several reasons. It would give me a chance to interact directly with Kate Morrison and other senior leaders in a more relaxed setting, potentially building relationships that could support my career growth as the RetailMax partnership moved forward. It would also provide an opportunity to celebrate the successful board presentation with colleagues who had supported the RetailMax relationship development over the past 2 years. Most importantly, I saw the retreat as a chance to reset my relationship with Rob. Away from the daily pressures of client management and deal negotiations, perhaps we could find a way to work together more collaboratively, focusing on our shared interest in TechFlow's success rather than the interpersonal tensions that had been building over the past few months. What I didn't anticipate was that Rob saw the retreat as his opportunity to finally address what he perceived as my insubordination and lack of respect for proper reporting structures. Surrounded by senior leadership and the entire company, he believed he could publicly establish his authority and put me in my place once and for all. The retreat began on a Wednesday morning with the usual mix of team-building activities and strategic presentations. The atmosphere was generally positive, with people excited to see colleagues from other offices and hear about TechFlow's growth plans for the coming year. Kate Morrison's opening presentation was particularly energizing, outlining ambitious expansion goals and highlighting the RetailMax partnership as a cornerstone of TechFlow's strategy for moving into larger, more strategic client relationships. During her presentation, Kate specifically mentioned the importance of deep client relationships and individual expertise in driving business development success. She talked about the need to empower team members who had built strong client connections to take ownership of those relationships and drive them forward strategically. While she didn't mention me by name, several colleagues glanced in my direction during these comments, clearly understanding the relevance to the RetailMax situation. After Kate's presentation, we broke into smaller working groups to discuss implementation strategies for the goals she'd outlined. I found myself in a group focused on partnership development and client relationship management, which included several senior leaders from different divisions. The conversation was engaging and substantive, with people sharing examples of successful client partnerships and discussing best practices for building strategic relationships. During this discussion, I shared some insights from the RetailMax partnership development, focusing on lessons learned about building client confidence and managing complex technical requirements. The response was very positive, with several people asking follow-up questions about specific strategies and approaches that had worked well with RetailMax. Rob was in a different working group, but I noticed him glancing over at our conversation several times, his expression growing increasingly dark as he watched me engage with senior leadership about the RetailMax partnership. I tried to catch his eye and give him a friendly nod or smile, hoping to diffuse whatever tension he was feeling, but he avoided eye contact and turned back to his own group's discussion. The first day of the retreat concluded with a networking reception on the resort's lakeside terrace. The setting was beautiful, with the late afternoon sun reflecting off Lake Travis and creating a relaxed atmosphere for informal conversations. I spent most of the reception talking with colleagues I rarely saw from our satellite offices, sharing updates about current projects and learning about interesting developments in their markets. Kate Morrison was circulating through the crowd, making a point to have personal conversations with employees at all levels. When she reached me, she asked about my thoughts on the morning's discussions and expressed particular interest in hearing more about the RetailMax partnership lessons I'd shared in my working group. We had a 15-minute conversation about relationship-building strategies, client communication approaches, and the challenges of managing complex technical partnerships. Kate was an engaged and thoughtful listener, asking questions that demonstrated she understood both the business development and relationship management aspects of what I'd been doing with RetailMax. Near the end of our conversation, Kate made a comment that would prove to be significant. "Jen, I want you to know that I've been following your work with RetailMax closely, and I'm impressed by what you've built there. That partnership represents exactly the kind of strategic relationship that will drive TechFlow's growth over the next 5 years. I'm looking forward to working with you directly as we move forward with implementation." The phrase "working with you directly" caught my attention. It suggested that Kate saw me as a peer-level collaborator, rather than just a mid-level employee managed by Rob. I thanked her for the feedback and expressed my excitement about the partnership opportunity. What I didn't notice was that Rob had been standing nearby during the latter part of our conversation, close enough to overhear Kate's comments about working with me directly on the RetailMax partnership. Later, I would realize that this overheard conversation was the final trigger for the confrontation that would come the next day. The second day of the retreat was focused on strategic planning and departmental breakout sessions. Rob seemed more tense than usual during breakfast, making short responses to colleagues' attempts at conversation and checking his phone frequently. I tried to engage him in friendly conversation about the previous day's sessions, but he gave me one-word answers and seemed distracted. During the morning strategic planning session, Kate Morrison presented detailed financial projections for TechFlow's growth over the next 3 years. The RetailMax partnership featured prominently in these projections, with revenue estimates That would make it our single largest client relationship and a significant driver of company-wide growth. As Kate discussed the RetailMax partnership, she referred to it as a model for the kind of strategic client relationships TechFlow needed to prioritize. She talked about the importance of deep industry expertise, long-term relationship building, and the ability to collaborate with clients as trusted partners, rather than just service providers. During the Q&A session following Kate's presentation, several people asked questions about how TechFlow could replicate the RetailMax partnership model with other clients. Kate's responses consistently emphasized the importance of individual expertise and relationship-building skills, noting that successful partnerships required team members who could become trusted advisors to client organizations. I could see Rob shifting uncomfortably in his seat during these discussions. Every time Kate praised the partnership model or talked about the importance of individual client relationships, he seemed to take it as a personal criticism of his management approach. I was sitting several rows behind him, but I could see the tension in his shoulders and the way he was gripping his pen. After lunch, we had departmental breakout sessions where each division discussed implementation strategies for the goals Kate had outlined in the morning. The business development session was led by Amanda Chen from HR and included all the client-facing team members from across TechFlow's offices. The conversation naturally turned to the RetailMax partnership as an example of successful strategic relationship building. Amanda asked me to walk the group through the development of that relationship, from initial contact through the current partnership negotiations. I provided a comprehensive overview, focusing on lessons learned and strategies that could be applicable to other client relationships. The response from the group was extremely positive. People asked detailed questions about specific approaches, relationship-building techniques, and methods for transitioning from vendor relationships to strategic partnerships. Several colleagues mentioned that they'd been trying to apply similar approaches with their own clients and were seeing positive results. Rob participated minimally in this discussion, occasionally making comments about the importance of team coordination and proper reporting, but not contributing substantive insights about client relationship management or business development strategy. I could tell he was uncomfortable with the focus on my work with RetailMax, but I assumed he was just having an off day and would bounce back during the evening's activities. That evening's program included a formal dinner followed by recognition, awards, and entertainment. The atmosphere was celebratory, with people relaxed and enjoying the opportunity to socialize with colleagues outside the normal work environment. Kate Morrison gave a toast highlighting TechFlow's achievements over the past year and expressing optimism about the future growth opportunities ahead of us. During dinner, I was seated at a table with colleagues from different offices, having engaging conversations about various projects and sharing stories about interesting client experiences. Rob was at a different table, but I noticed him watching me frequently throughout the meal, his expression increasingly dark. After dinner, Kate Morrison began the recognition portion of the evening, highlighting outstanding achievements and contributions from the past year. There were awards for various categories, including top sales performance, innovative problem-solving, and outstanding client service. While I wasn't expecting any formal recognition, several colleagues mentioned that they thought the RetailMax partnership deserved acknowledgement. About halfway through the recognition ceremony, Kate called for a brief intermission before continuing with the final awards. During this break, people moved around the room, refilling drinks and having informal conversations. I was talking with Lisa Rodriguez, a colleague from our Dallas office who had become a close friend over the years we'd worked together. Lisa and I were discussing some of the strategic planning conversations from earlier in the day when Rob suddenly appeared beside us. His face was flushed, and he seemed agitated in a way I'd never seen before. "Jen, I need to speak with you privately," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. I excused myself from the conversation with Lisa and followed Rob to a quieter corner of the room, assuming he wanted to discuss some work-related issue that couldn't wait until we returned to the office. What I didn't anticipate was that he was about to publicly humiliate me in front of our entire company in a way that would ultimately expose his own incompetence and insecurity. What happened next still feels surreal to me, even months later. Rob's face was red with anger as he pulled me aside, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. "I've had enough of your grandstanding and self-promotion," he hissed, keeping his voice low but intense. "You've been undermining my authority for months, going directly to Kate Morrison, making me look incompetent in front of clients, and acting like you're running your own personal consulting firm instead of being part of my team." I was stunned by the accusation. "Rob, I don't understand what you're talking about. I've been doing my job, managing the RetailMax relationship like I always have. If there's been a communication issue, we should discuss it privately back at the office." His eyes flashed with fury. "Communication issue? You've been deliberately cutting me out of client relationships, presenting yourself as the sole contact for RetailMax, and making strategic decisions without consulting me. Yesterday, I heard Kate Morrison talking about working with you directly on the RetailMax partnership. Not with our team, not with my department, but with you personally." The pieces suddenly clicked into place. Rob had overheard my conversation with Kate the night before, and her comment about working with me directly had triggered this confrontation. "Rob, Kate was referring to my role as the primary relationship manager for RetailMax. That's been my responsibility from the beginning. I'm not trying to undermine you or work outside the team structure." "That's exactly what you're doing," he snapped. "And it stops tonight. I'm tired of your insubordination and your complete disregard for proper reporting chains. You've made it clear that you think you don't need to follow company protocols or respect management authority." I tried to keep my voice calm and professional. "I've never been insubordinate. I've always kept you informed about client communications and strategic developments. If you feel like there have been communication gaps, let's schedule time next week to review our processes and make sure we're aligned going forward." Rob shook his head violently. "It's too late for that. You've poisoned this relationship and created an untenable situation. I can't have someone on my team who fundamentally doesn't respect my authority and actively works to undermine my leadership." The conversation was getting increasingly heated, and I became aware that people nearby were starting to notice our intense discussion. Lisa was watching from across the room with obvious concern, and several other colleagues were glancing in our direction. "Rob, let's take this conversation outside or back to your room. We don't need to hash this out in front of everyone." "No," he said, his voice rising slightly. "I'm done with private conversations that you then ignore or work around. This needs to be addressed directly and definitively." What happened next felt like it was happening in slow motion. Rob stepped back from me and raised his voice loud enough for nearby conversations to stop. "Jen, your behavior over the past several months has become completely unacceptable. You've repeatedly violated company protocols, disrespected management authority, and created a toxic environment that undermines team cohesion." The room was beginning to quiet as people turned to look at what was clearly becoming a public confrontation. I felt my face burning with embarrassment and confusion. "Rob, please, let's discuss this privately. This isn't the appropriate venue for this conversation. You've made private discussions impossible through your actions," he continued, his voice now carrying across the room. "I've tried to address your behavior through normal channels, but you've made it clear that you consider yourself above standard management oversight." Kate Morrison had been standing near the front of the room, preparing to resume the recognition ceremony, but I could see her turning to look at the commotion we were creating. Other senior leaders were also focusing their attention on our confrontation, their expressions ranging from confusion to obvious displeasure at the disruption. "I'm not above management oversight," I said, trying to keep my voice level despite the humiliation of having this conversation in front of the entire company. I've always followed proper protocols and kept you informed about client developments. If there's been a miscommunication, we can resolve it professionally. Rob was clearly beyond rational discussion at this point. The RetailMax situation is a perfect example of your problematic behavior. You've presented yourself as the sole architect of that relationship, taken credit for strategic decisions made by the team, and deliberately excluded me from important client communications. This accusation was so far from reality that I couldn't help but respond. That's not true, Rob. I've included you in all major client communications and decision points. The RetailMax executives specifically requested me as their primary contact because I've been managing their account for 2 years. That doesn't mean I'm taking credit for team contributions or excluding you from the relationship. You're doing it right now, he shot back. You can't even acknowledge that this is a team effort under my leadership. Everything has to be about your personal relationship with the client and your individual contributions. The entire room had gone silent now, with everyone watching our confrontation unfold. I could see Kate Morrison walking toward us, her expression serious and concerned. I felt mortified that our personal conflict was playing out in front of the entire company, including senior leadership who were supposed to be evaluating our professionalism and potential for advancement. Rob, I've never claimed sole credit for the RetailMax relationship, I said, my voice shaking slightly with emotion. I've consistently acknowledged the team's contributions while fulfilling my role as the primary relationship manager. If you feel like there have been communication issues, we should address them through proper HR channels, not in front of our colleagues. HR channels? Rob laughed bitterly. You mean like when you went directly to Kate Morrison to discuss RetailMax strategy without including me in the conversation? Or when you scheduled client presentations without consulting with management? First, these accusations were becoming increasingly divorced from reality, and I realized that Rob's anger had moved beyond rational discussion into personal attack territory. I've never circumvented proper protocols. When Kate asked me about RetailMax, I provided information about my area of responsibility. When RetailMax requested a presentation, I followed standard procedures for client engagement. Kate Morrison had reached us now, her expression serious but controlled. Is there a problem here that needs to be addressed? She asked, looking between Rob and me with obvious displeasure at the public nature of our conflict. Rob turned to Kate with what seemed like relief, as if her arrival validated his position. Yes, there is a serious problem that I need to address immediately. Jen has been consistently insubordinate and has created a situation that's damaging to team morale and client relationships. Kate's eyebrows rose slightly. This seems like something that should be discussed privately, not in front of the entire company during our recognition ceremony. I've tried private discussions, Rob continued, his voice still elevated. Jen has made it clear that she doesn't respect management authority and considers herself exempt from normal reporting structures. This behavior has reached a point where it's affecting our ability to serve clients effectively. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare. Rob was describing a version of our working relationship that bore no resemblance to reality, and he was doing it in front of Kate Morrison and the entire company. Kate, I've always followed proper protocols and reporting structures. If Rob has concerns about my performance or communication, I'm happy to address them through appropriate channels. Kate looked at me with what seemed like understanding, then turned back to Rob. What specifically are you asking me to do about this situation? Rob's response shocked me to my core. I'm terminating Jen's employment effective immediately. Her behavior has become detrimental to team functioning and client relationships, and I can't continue to manage someone who fundamentally refuses to accept management authority. The words hit me like a physical blow, fired, publicly, in front of the entire company, for reasons that made no sense and accusations that weren't true. I stood there in stunned silence, unable to process what was happening. Kate Morrison's expression shifted to something I couldn't quite read, a mix of surprise and what looked like anger. "Rob, you're terminating Jen's employment right now, during our company retreat in front of everyone?" "Yes," Rob said, seeming to gain confidence from Kate's attention. "This situation has reached a point where immediate action is necessary. Jen's insubordination and disrespect for management authority cannot continue." The room was absolutely silent now, with everyone staring at our group in shock. I could see Lisa Rodriguez looking horrified from across the room, along with other colleagues whose expressions ranged from confusion to obvious disapproval of what they were witnessing. "Jen, please gather your personal belongings and leave the retreat immediately," Rob continued, his voice carrying across the silent room. "Security will escort you to your room to collect your things, and we'll handle the formal termination paperwork when we return to the office on Monday." I felt dizzy and nauseous, completely overwhelmed by the public humiliation and the sudden destruction of my career. 4.5 years of successful work, the RetailMax partnership that was supposed to transform TechFlow's business, my reputation in the industry, all apparently destroyed in a matter of minutes by a boss who had decided I was a threat to his authority. Kate Morrison was staring at Rob with an expression I'd never seen before, something between disbelief and fury. "Rob, you're firing one of our senior business development managers during our annual retreat without any prior documentation or HR involvement?" "I have the authority to make personnel decisions for my team," Rob replied, though he seemed less confident now. "Jen's behavior has created an untenable situation that requires immediate action." "What about the RetailMax partnership?" Kate asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Jen has been the primary relationship manager for that account. How do you plan to handle the transition during active contract negotiations?" Rob waved dismissively. "Tyler has been working closely with the RetailMax team and can take over the relationship management. We've been cross-training him specifically to provide continuity for important accounts." This statement was so absurd that I almost laughed despite my emotional state. Tyler had attended a few client meetings as an observer and had no understanding of the technical requirements, relationship dynamics, or negotiation strategies involved in the RetailMax partnership. The idea that he could step in as the primary relationship manager was ridiculous. Kate's expression darkened further. "Tyler, your son who graduated from college 6 months ago and has been working as a junior analyst. Tyler has demonstrated strong potential and has been developing expertise in retail technology partnerships," Rob said defensively. "He's capable of managing the RetailMax relationship with appropriate support." I could see that Kate was struggling to maintain her composure. The entire company was watching this confrontation unfold, and the tension in the room was palpable. I felt like I should say something to defend myself, but I was too shocked and humiliated to form coherent thoughts. "Security will escort Jen to collect her belongings," Rob announced to the room, as if he were making an official company announcement. "I apologize for the disruption to our retreat activities, but this situation required immediate attention." 2 resort security guards had appeared at the edge of the room, clearly uncomfortable with being involved in what was obviously a workplace dispute. One of them approached our group hesitantly. "Ma'am, we understand you need to collect your belongings from your room?" I nodded numbly, still unable to fully process what was happening. I was being escorted out of my company retreat like a criminal, in front of all my colleagues, because my boss had decided I was insubordinate for doing my job effectively. As I turned to leave with the security guards, I caught Kate Morrison's eye. Her expression was unreadable, but she gave me a slight nod that seemed to convey something, though I was too emotional to interpret what it might mean. The walk to my room felt endless, with the security guards maintaining professional silence while I tried to hold back tears of humiliation and rage. The hallways that had seemed welcoming and elegant when I arrived just 2 days earlier now felt like a gauntlet of shame. In my room, I mechanically packed my belongings while the security guards waited outside. My hands were shaking as I folded clothes and gathered toiletries, my mind reeling with the implications of what had just happened. I'd been fired publicly, dramatically, in front of senior leadership and colleagues who would now see me as someone who had been terminated for insubordination. The drive back to Austin was a blur of tears, anger, and desperate attempts to understand how my career had imploded so suddenly. I kept replaying the confrontation, trying to figure out what I could have done differently or how I had misread the situation so badly. By the time I reached my apartment, the shock was beginning to wear off and anger was taking its place. Rob's accusations had been unfair and largely untrue. But more importantly, his decision to fire me publicly during the company retreat was unprofessional and cruel, in ways that seemed designed to maximize my humiliation and damage my professional reputation. I spent that night alternating between rage and despair, trying to figure out what my next steps should be. I'd been fired without warning, without documentation, and without any opportunity to defend myself or address the supposed performance issues that Rob claimed justified my termination. The next morning, I called Lisa Rodriguez, who had texted me several times after the retreat confrontation, expressing shock and concern about what had happened. "Jen, everyone is talking about what Rob did last night," she said immediately. "People are outraged. That was completely inappropriate and unprofessional." "It doesn't matter what people think," I replied bitterly. "I'm fired. My career at TechFlow is over, and my reputation in the industry is probably destroyed." "Don't be so sure about that," Lisa said carefully. "There are a lot of people who know the quality of your work and the value you brought to the company. What Rob did last night reflected badly on him, not on you. Try explaining that to future employers when they ask why I was terminated," I said. "How do I explain that my boss fired me during a company retreat for being insubordinate when I was actually just doing my job?" Lisa was quiet for a moment. "Jen, there's something you should know. After you left last night, Kate Morrison was furious. I mean, absolutely livid. She cut the recognition ceremony short and went straight to her room, but not before making some very pointed comments about proper termination procedures and management accountability. This information gave me a small glimmer of hope, but I was too emotionally drained to feel optimistic. Even if Kate was upset about how Rob handled the situation, it doesn't change the fact that I'm fired. She's not going to override a termination decision just because she didn't like the timing or the venue." "Maybe not," Lisa agreed. "But there might be more to this story than you realize. Rob made some very specific claims about your performance and behavior that a lot of people know aren't accurate. That creates potential legal issues for TechFlow if they try to uphold a termination based on false accusations." Over the weekend, I received several calls and texts from colleagues expressing support and outrage about Rob's behavior during the retreat. While their concern was comforting, it also reinforced how public and humiliating my termination had been. Everyone at TechFlow now knew that I'd been fired dramatically during our company retreat, regardless of the circumstances or justifications. On Sunday evening, I received an unexpected call from David Park at RetailMax. "Jen, I heard through the grapevine that there were some personnel changes at TechFlow. Is everything all right with our partnership discussions?" I struggled with how to respond. I didn't want to create problems for TechFlow or damage the RetailMax relationship, but I also needed to be honest about my status. "David, there have been some changes in my employment situation. I'm no longer with TechFlow as of Friday evening." There was a long pause. "You're no longer with TechFlow in the middle of our partnership negotiations? What happened?" There were some disagreements about management approaches and client relationship strategies," I said diplomatically. "My former supervisor felt that immediate changes were necessary." "This is very concerning," David said, his voice tight, with worry. "Jen, you've been our primary contact and strategic partner for this entire relationship. We've built our partnership expectations around working with you specifically. How is TechFlow planning to handle the transition? I believe they're planning to have Tyler Mitchell take over as the primary relationship manager, I said, feeling sick as I spoke the words. Tyler Mitchell? The junior analyst who's been observing our meetings for the past few months? Jen, no disrespect to Tyler, but he doesn't have the background or expertise to manage a partnership of this complexity. We're talking about a multi-million-dollar strategic relationship that requires deep understanding of both technical requirements and business strategy. I understand your concerns, I said carefully. You should discuss the transition plan directly with Rob Hayes or other TechFlow leadership to understand how they plan to ensure continuity. David was quiet for a moment. Jen, can I ask you a direct question? If you're no longer with TechFlow, what are your plans? Are you taking another position in the industry? The question caught me off guard. I hadn't even begun to think about my next career steps, still too shocked and angry about my termination to consider future opportunities. I'm evaluating my options, I said vaguely. Well, when you've had time to consider your situation, I'd like to have a conversation with you about potential opportunities. The retail technology space is evolving rapidly, and there's a significant need for people with your expertise and client relationship skills. After ending the call with David, I sat in my apartment trying to process this unexpected development. RetailMax's key decision-maker had essentially indicated that they valued my individual contributions more than their relationship with TechFlow as a company. This suggested that Rob's decision to fire me might have more significant business implications than he had anticipated. On Monday morning, I was supposed to report to TechFlow's offices for the formal termination paperwork that Rob had mentioned during the retreat confrontation. I dreaded the meeting, knowing that it would involve uncomfortable conversations with HR about the reasons for my termination and the circumstances surrounding Rob's decision. I arrived at the office early, hoping to avoid running into colleagues who might feel awkward about the retreat situation. The building felt different somehow, as if my changed status had altered my relationship with the physical space where I'd worked for 4.5 years. Amanda Chen from HR was waiting for me in a conference room with a stack of paperwork and a serious expression. Jen, I want you to know that I've reviewed the circumstances of your termination, and I have some concerns about the process that was followed. This was not what I had expected to hear. What kind of concerns? Rob's decision to terminate your employment was made without any prior documentation of performance issues, without HR consultation, and without following standard termination procedures, Amanda explained. Additionally, the public nature of the termination during our company retreat raises significant questions about appropriateness and potential legal liability. I felt a spark of hope for the first time since Friday night. Does that mean the termination might be reversed? Amanda hesitated. I can't make that determination unilaterally. However, I've scheduled a meeting with Kate Morrison this afternoon to review the situation and discuss next steps. In the meantime, I'd like you to provide me with your perspective on the events leading up to Friday's confrontation. I spent the next hour giving Amanda a detailed account of my relationship with Rob, the RetailMax partnership development, and the specific events that had led to the retreat confrontation. I tried to be objective and factual, focusing on specific incidents and avoiding personal opinions about Rob's motivations or character. Amanda took careful notes and asked thoughtful questions about client relationships, communication protocols, and my understanding of proper reporting procedures. Her question suggested that she was building a comprehensive picture of the situation rather than simply processing routine termination paperwork. Jen, based on what you've told me and other information I've gathered, I believe there are significant procedural and substantive issues with your termination, Amanda said as our meeting concluded. I can't promise any specific outcomes, but I want you to know that TechFlow takes these situations seriously and will conduct a thorough review. That afternoon, while I was at home trying to update my resume and figure out my next steps, I received a call from Kate Morrison herself. Jen, I'd like to meet with you tomorrow morning to discuss Friday's events and your employment situation. Would you be available to come to the office at 9 a.m.? Of course, I said, my heart racing. Should I bring anything specific to the meeting? Just yourself, Kate replied. We have a lot to discuss. That evening, Lisa called to check on how my day had gone. I heard through the office grapevine that there were some high-level meetings today about your situation. Kate Morrison looked pretty intense when she was talking with Amanda Chen this afternoon. Kate wants to meet with me tomorrow morning, I told her. I don't know whether to be hopeful or terrified. Be hopeful, Lisa advised. A lot of people are talking about how inappropriate Rob's behavior was on Friday night. There's a growing consensus that he seriously overstepped his authority and created liability issues for the company. Even if that's true, I don't know if Kate will be willing to reverse a termination decision. That would be admitting that TechFlow made a serious mistake, and it could undermine Rob's authority as a manager. Maybe Rob's authority needs to be undermined, Lisa said pointedly. What he did to you was wrong, and everyone knows it. If Kate doesn't address it appropriately, she's going to have bigger problems than just one questionable termination. Tuesday morning, I arrived at TechFlow's offices with a mixture of hope and dread. I'd barely slept the night before, alternating between optimism that Kate might reverse my termination and fear that the meeting was simply a formality before finalizing my dismissal. Kate Morrison was waiting for me in her temporary office, along with Amanda Chen and another woman I didn't recognize. Jen, thank you for coming in. I'd like you to meet Sarah Williams, our corporate attorney who specializes in employment law. The presence of a lawyer made me nervous, but I tried to remain calm and professional. Thank you for meeting with me. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss Friday's events. Kate's expression was serious but not unfriendly. Jen, I've spent the past 3 days reviewing your employment record, your performance evaluations, your client relationships, and the specific circumstances that led to your termination. I've also spoken with several colleagues and clients to get a complete picture of your contributions to TechFlow. I waited for her to continue, my hands folded tightly in my lap to keep them from shaking. Based on this review, I've concluded that your termination was inappropriate, unprofessional, and potentially damaging to TechFlow's business interests, Kate continued. Rob Hayes exceeded his authority, violated company policies, and made decisions based on personal conflicts, rather than legitimate business concerns. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, though I tried to maintain my composure. Does that mean you're reversing the termination? Yes, Kate said firmly. Your termination is being reversed effective immediately. You'll be reinstated with full back pay and benefits, and there will be no record of termination in your employment file. The words felt almost too good to be true. Thank you. I'm grateful for the opportunity to return to work and continue contributing to TechFlow's success. Kate held up a hand. There's more we need to discuss. The RetailMax partnership situation has become significantly more complicated since Friday night. My stomach tightened. What do you mean? David Park called me yesterday morning to express serious concerns about the transition plan for the RetailMax relationship, Kate explained. He was very clear that RetailMax's confidence in the partnership is directly tied to your continued involvement as their primary relationship manager. I see, I said carefully, not sure where this conversation was heading. David also mentioned that he'd spoken with you about potential opportunities if you decided to leave TechFlow? Kate continued, her expression sharpening. He seemed to think that RetailMax might be interested in working with you independently if you decided to start your own consulting practice. This was getting into delicate territory. David did mention that there might be opportunities in the industry, but I haven't made any commitments or specific plans. Kate leaned forward slightly. Jen, I'm going to be direct with you. The RetailMax partnership represents potentially the most important business development opportunity in TechFlow's history. Your relationship with their leadership team is clearly crucial to making that partnership successful. I nodded, not sure what response she was looking for. At the same time, Rob's behavior on Friday night created a situation that damaged both your professional reputation and TechFlow's credibility with an important client, Kate continued. That puts us in a position where we need to find a solution that addresses the harm that was done while also securing the business relationship that's so important to our company's future. What kind of solution are you thinking about? I asked. Sarah Williams, the attorney, spoke for the first time. We're prepared to offer you a significant promotion and compensation increase, along with a formal apology from the company for the inappropriate termination process. We'd also like to discuss a retention agreement that would provide additional incentives for you to remain with TechFlow long-term. This was far more than I had dared to hope for when I walked into the meeting. Not only was my termination being reversed, but TechFlow was essentially admitting that they had made a serious mistake and were willing to compensate me for the damage that had been done. What about Rob? I asked. How do we handle the management relationship going forward? Kate's expression grew grim. Rob Hayes is no longer with TechFlow. His employment was terminated yesterday for violation of company policies, inappropriate management practices, and actions that damaged important client relationships. I was stunned. Rob was fired? Yes, Kate said simply. His decision to terminate you publicly without documentation or proper procedures violated multiple company policies. More importantly, his actions threatened one of our most important business relationships and created significant legal liability for TechFlow. The irony was almost overwhelming. Rob had fired me on Friday night for insubordination and disrespect for management authority, and now he had been fired for the very behavior he had accused me of. There's one more thing we need to discuss, Kate continued. Given the disruption caused by this situation and the importance of the RetailMax relationship, I'd like to offer you a new position that reflects your actual role and contributions. What kind of position? Director of Strategic Partnerships, Kate said. You'd report directly to me, with responsibility for developing and managing TechFlow's most important client relationships. The RetailMax partnership would be your primary focus, but you'd also work on identifying and developing other strategic opportunities. The offer was beyond anything I had imagined when I woke up that morning. Not only was I getting my job back, but I was being promoted to a senior leadership position with direct access to the CEO and responsibility for the company's most important business development initiatives. That sounds like an incredible opportunity, I said. I'm very interested in discussing the details. Kate smiled for the first time during our meeting. Excellent. Amanda will work with you on the specifics of compensation, benefits, and your transition into the new role. But first, there's something else we need to address. What's that? The RetailMax board presentation that was scheduled for this Thursday, Kate said. David Park called me yesterday to confirm that the presentation is still on their calendar, but they specifically requested that you be the primary presenter. They want to move forward with the partnership, but only if you're personally involved in the implementation. I felt a surge of validation and excitement. Despite everything that had happened over the past few days, RetailMax still wanted to work with me directly. Their confidence in my abilities had been strong enough to survive my temporary termination and the uncertainty about my employment status. I'd be honored to present to their board, I said. The partnership opportunity is exactly the kind of strategic relationship that TechFlow needs to pursue. Good, Kate said, standing up from her chair. Because there's one more surprise I have for you. She walked to the door of her office and opened it, gesturing for me to follow her. We walked down the hallway toward the main conference room, with Amanda and Sarah following behind us. As we approached the conference room, I could hear voices inside, suggesting that there was already a meeting in progress. Kate opened the door and gestured for me to enter first. Inside the conference room, I was shocked to see David Park from RetailMax, along with two other RetailMax executives I recognized from previous meetings. They were sitting around the conference table with several TechFlow senior leaders, apparently in the middle of a discussion. When I entered the room, David Park stood up with a smile. "Jen, excellent timing. We were just discussing the partnership. Presentation scheduled for Thursday." Kate Morrison walked to the front of the room and addressed the group. "Everyone, I'd like to officially announce that Jen Carter has accepted the position of Director of Strategic Partnerships, effective immediately. She'll be leading TechFlow's efforts on the RetailMax partnership and other strategic client relationships." The applause from both the TechFlow and RetailMax representatives was genuine and enthusiastic. I felt overwhelmed by the dramatic reversal of my professional circumstances in just 4 days. David Park approached me with an extended hand. "Congratulations on your promotion, Jen. We're excited to continue working with you in your new role." As I shook his hand, Kate Morrison made one final comment that would stick with me for months afterward. "Jen, I want you to know that RetailMax has made it clear that their willingness to move forward with this partnership is contingent on your direct involvement. They see you as their primary partner in this relationship, and that confidence is exactly what we need to make this opportunity successful." The word partner seemed to hang in the air. Just 4 days earlier, Rob Hayes had fired me for allegedly undermining his authority and disrespecting management structures. Now, the Keys, CEO of my company, and the leadership team of our most important client were describing me as a partner in a multi-million-dollar strategic relationship. As the meeting concluded and people began filing out of the conference room, I reflected on the incredible journey of the past few days. What had begun as the most humiliating professional experience of my life had transformed into the greatest career opportunity I could have imagined. But the story was far from over. The real test would come in the following weeks and months as I worked to prove that TechFlow's confidence in my abilities was justified and that the RetailMax partnership could deliver the transformational results everyone was anticipating. The Thursday morning RetailMax board presentation felt like stepping into an entirely different universe than the one I'd inhabited just a week earlier. Walking into their corporate headquarters in downtown Austin, I carried myself with a confidence that came not just from knowing my material inside and out, but from the knowledge that I was no longer fighting for recognition or respect. I was there as TechFlow's Director of Strategic Partnerships, personally endorsed by our CEO and specifically requested by the client. David Park met me in the lobby with a warmth that made it clear how relieved he was about the resolution of my employment situation. "Jen, I have to tell you, when I heard about what happened at your company retreat, our entire executive team was concerned about the future of this partnership. Your promotion to Director of Strategic Partnerships tells us everything we need to know about how TechFlow really values this relationship." The boardroom was impressive, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Austin skyline and a polished conference table that could seat 20 people. RetailMax's board members were already assembled, including several faces I recognized from previous interactions and a few new executives I'd be meeting for the first time. The energy in the room was positive and expectant, a stark contrast to the hostile environment I'd faced with Rob just days earlier. As I set up my presentation materials, I reflected on how dramatically my perspective had shifted. A week ago, I'd been preparing for this same presentation while worrying about Rob's interference and his attempts to insert Tyler into the client relationship. Now, I was presenting as the designated strategic leader for TechFlow's most important partnership with complete authority to make commitments and strategic decisions. David introduced me to the board with obvious enthusiasm. "Everyone, I'm pleased to introduce Jen Carter, TechFlow's new Director of Strategic Partnerships. Jen has been our primary relationship manager for the past 2 years and is the architect of the partnership proposal we're discussing today. She'll be our main point of contact for implementation and ongoing strategic collaboration." The presentation itself was one of the most engaging and productive client interactions I'd ever experienced. Without Rob's interference or his tendency to insert irrelevant comments, I was able to maintain a natural flow of conversation with the board members, addressing their questions directly and building on their ideas in real time. The technical aspects of the partnership, which had always been my strength, came across clearly and comprehensively. What struck me most was how different the dynamic felt when I was presenting as a true strategic partner rather than as someone who had to constantly justify my expertise or defend my client relationships. The board members treated me as a peer-level consultant, asking for my professional opinions on market trends, technology evolution, and strategic positioning, rather than simply seeking confirmation of predetermined decisions. The financial projections were even more compelling than I'd anticipated. The initial 3-year development contract would generate $2.8 million in revenue for TechFlow, but the long-term licensing and partnership opportunities could potentially reach $50 million over the next decade. More importantly, success with RetailMax would establish TechFlow as a leader in retail technology innovation, opening doors to similar partnerships with other major retailers. When I reached the section of my presentation about implementation, timeline, and project management, one of the board members asked a question that perfectly illustrated why my direct involvement was so crucial to the partnership's success. Jen, you've outlined an aggressive 18-month development schedule for the core platform. What gives you confidence that TechFlow can deliver on these timelines while maintaining the quality standards that RetailMax requires? The question required deep knowledge of both TechFlow's technical capabilities and RetailMax's operational requirements, along with understanding of the specific challenges that typically arose during complex software development projects. It was exactly the kind of strategic inquiry that Rob would have struggled to answer and that Tyler couldn't have addressed at all. I walked them through our risk mitigation strategies, drawing on specific examples from previous projects and demonstrating how we'd learned from past challenges to build more robust development processes. I discussed the technical team we'd assembled, the quality assurance protocols we'd implement, and the communication structures that would ensure transparency and accountability throughout the development process. The board members asked follow-up questions that showed they were seriously evaluating not just the partnership proposal, but my personal capability to manage such an ambitious undertaking. Their questions were tough and detailed, covering everything, from technical architecture decisions to change management protocols to contingency planning for potential setbacks. By the time I finished the formal presentation, it was clear that the energy in the room had shifted from cautious interest to genuine enthusiasm. The board members were asking questions about next steps and implementation details rather than fundamental concerns about feasibility or partnership structure. The chairman of RetailMax's board, an impressive woman named Patricia Sullivan, who had built her career in retail operations, summarized the discussion with comments that validated everything I'd hoped to achieve. Jen, this partnership proposal represents exactly the kind of strategic innovation that RetailMax needs to maintain our competitive position in a rapidly evolving market. Your presentation has given us confidence that TechFlow has both the technical expertise and the relationship management capabilities to make this partnership successful. David Park added his own endorsement. The board should know that Jen's promotion to Director of Strategic Partnerships at TechFlow demonstrates their commitment to this relationship at the highest levels. We're not just partnering with a consulting firm. We're partnering with a strategic leader who understands our business and shares our vision for the future of retail technology. The formal vote was unanimous. RetailMax's board approved the partnership proposal and authorized their executive team to begin contract negotiations immediately. The initial development contract would be signed within 30 days, with work beginning as soon as the legal and technical frameworks were established. As the meeting concluded, Patricia Sullivan approached me personally. Jen, I want you to know that this board's confidence in moving forward is based largely on our confidence in you personally. We've worked with many consulting firms over the years, and most of them assign different people to manage relationships versus deliver technical solutions. The fact that you combine deep client relationship skills with genuine technical expertise is exactly what we need for a partnership of this scope. The drive back to TechFlow's offices felt surreal. Less than a week earlier, I'd been publicly fired and escorted out of a company retreat. Now, I'd just secured the largest and most strategic contract in TechFlow's history, with a clear path to long-term partnership opportunities that could transform our entire business model. Kate Morrison was waiting for me when I arrived back, at the office, eager to hear about the board's response. When I briefed her on the unanimous approval and the enthusiastic support for moving forward immediately, her smile was broader than I'd ever seen. "Jen, this is incredible news for TechFlow," she said. "This partnership validates our strategic direction and positions us for the kind of growth we've been working toward for years. But more importantly, it demonstrates that our decision to promote you and restructure our client relationship management was exactly the right call." Over the following weeks, I threw myself into the complex work of negotiating contract terms, establishing project management structures, and building the internal teams that would deliver on our commitments to RetailMax. The contrast with my previous working environment was striking. Instead of having to navigate Rob's insecurities and justify every strategic decision, I was working directly with Kate Morrison and other senior leaders who trusted my judgment and supported my recommendations. The first major milestone came when we signed the initial development contract with RetailMax. The signing ceremony took place at TechFlow's offices, with representatives from both companies celebrating the beginning of what everyone expected to be a transformational partnership. Local business media covered the announcement, describing it as one of the largest technology partnerships ever established between Austin-based companies. What made the ceremony particularly meaningful for me was the speech that Kate Morrison gave to the assembled group. "This partnership represents more than just a business opportunity," she said. "It demonstrates the importance of recognizing and empowering the individual expertise that drives successful client relationships. Jen Carter's leadership of this partnership shows what's possible when we align our organizational structure with our most important strategic relationships." The implicit contrast with Rob's management approach was clear to everyone who had been involved in the previous week's events. Kate was essentially acknowledging that TechFlow's traditional hierarchical approach to client management had been limiting our potential, and that empowering relationship leaders like me was crucial to our future success. The announcement of the RetailMax partnership had immediate ripple effects throughout TechFlow's business development efforts. Other potential clients who had been considering working with us accelerated their decision-making processes, wanting to partner with the company that had secured such a significant strategic relationship. Within 6 weeks of the RetailMax signing, I was managing discussions with 3 other major retailers who were interested in similar partnership arrangements. One of the most satisfying developments was the evolution of my relationship with Tyler, Rob's son, who had been inappropriately positioned as my potential replacement. With Rob no longer at TechFlow and Tyler freed from the pressure of being fast-tracked into responsibilities he wasn't ready for, he was able to find his actual strengths and interests within the company. Tyler approached me about a month after the RetailMax signing, asking if he could work on some of the technical research aspects of the partnership development. It turned out that his real interests and aptitudes were in data analysis and market research rather than client relationship management. When I gave him the opportunity to contribute in ways that matched his skills, he proved to be a valuable team member who brought fresh perspectives and genuine enthusiasm to the work. The irony wasn't lost on me that Tyler was actually more successful and happier working under my leadership than he had been when his father was trying to position him as my replacement. Rob's attempts to advance Tyler's career through nepotism and politics had actually been holding him back from finding his genuine professional strengths. 3 months after the RetailMax partnership began, Kate Morrison approached me with an opportunity that would have been unimaginable during my conflicts with Rob. TechFlow was considering opening a new office focused specifically on strategic partnerships and major account management, and Kate wanted me to lead the expansion. The success of the RetailMax partnership has convinced our board that TechFlow needs to fundamentally restructure how we approach our most important client relationships, Kate explained during our discussion. Instead of treating strategic partnerships as just larger versions of our standard consulting projects, we need to build a dedicated practice that specializes in long-term collaborative relationships. The new Strategic Partnerships division would operate with significant autonomy, focusing on clients who are interested in co-development opportunities, equity partnerships, and multi-year strategic collaborations. I would have authority to hire my own team, establish our own processes, and work directly with TechFlow's senior leadership to align partnership opportunities with the company's overall strategic direction. The opportunity was exactly what I'd always hoped my career could evolve toward. Instead of managing individual projects within someone else's organizational structure, I'd be building a new business model that reflected my understanding of how client relationships could create mutual value and long-term success. I accepted Kate's offer and spent the next several months building the Strategic Partnerships division from the ground up. The experience was exhilarating and challenging in ways I'd never encountered during my previous roles. Instead of working within established systems and processes, I was creating new approaches to client engagement, team management, and business development. The first major hire for my new division was Lisa Rodriguez, my friend and colleague who had been such a source of support during the difficult period around my termination and reinstatement. Lisa had strong project management skills and client relationship experience that complemented my strategic planning and business development background. More importantly, she shared my vision for how strategic partnerships could be different from traditional consulting relationships. Within 6 months, the Strategic Partnerships division had grown to 12 people and was managing 4 major client relationships, including the RetailMax partnership and 3 other significant strategic collaborations. Our revenue projections for the division's second year exceeded $8 million, making it one of TechFlow's fastest-growing and most profitable business units. The success of the division attracted attention from throughout the Austin technology community. Industry publications wrote articles about TechFlow's innovative approach to client partnerships, and I was invited to speak at conferences about strategic relationship management and collaborative business development. One of the most gratifying speaking opportunities came at the annual Austin Technology Council conference, where I was asked to present a case study about the RetailMax partnership. The audience included executives from major technology companies throughout Central Texas, along with potential clients who were interested in learning about partnership opportunities. During my presentation, I discussed how strategic partnerships differed from traditional consulting relationships, emphasizing the importance of mutual investment, shared risk and reward, and long-term commitment to collaborative success. I used specific examples from the RetailMax relationship to illustrate how partnership thinking had led to innovative solutions that benefited both companies. The response to my presentation was overwhelmingly positive, with several audience members approaching me afterward to discuss potential partnership opportunities for their own organizations. More importantly, the presentation established me as a thought leader in strategic partnership development, bringing recognition that extended far beyond TechFlow's immediate business interests. 6 months later, I received an invitation that represented the ultimate validation of my professional journey. The National Retail Federation, the industry's most prestigious organization, asked me to deliver the keynote address at their annual technology conference. The invitation specifically mentioned my leadership of the RetailMax partnership and my innovative approach to collaborative business development. Preparing for the keynote address gave me an opportunity to reflect on how dramatically my career and perspective had evolved since that humiliating night at the company retreat. The experience of being publicly fired had been devastating at the time, but it had ultimately forced both me and TechFlow to confront fundamental questions about leadership, recognition, and organizational structure. Rob's decision to fire me had been based on his perception that I was undermining his authority and operating outside proper management structures. What he failed to understand was that my client relationships and strategic thinking were actually more valuable than the traditional hierarchical authority he was trying to protect. The keynote address itself was delivered to an audience of over 1,500 retail and technology executives from across the country. I spoke about the evolution of business partnerships in the digital age, using the RetailMax collaboration as a primary example of how traditional vendor-client relationships could evolve into genuine strategic partnerships that created value for both organizations. The speech was well received, but what made it particularly meaningful for me was a conversation I had afterward with Patricia Sullivan, the RetailMax board chair, who had been such a strong supporter of our initial partnership proposal. "Jen, watching your career development over the past year has been inspiring," she said. "You've demonstrated that expertise and relationship management skills can be more valuable than traditional organizational authority when they're properly recognized and supported." She continued, "The success of our partnership with TechFlow has convinced RetailMax's board that we need to fundamentally rethink how we approach strategic vendor relationships. We're implementing partnership-focused relationship management across our entire technology portfolio, using the model you developed as our template." This conversation highlighted something I'd begun to understand about the broader implications of my experience with Rob and subsequent success with strategic partnerships. The conflicts I'd faced weren't just about personal relationships or management styles. They reflected deeper questions about how organizations recognize and utilize expertise in an increasingly complex and collaborative business environment. Traditional hierarchical management structures, like the one Rob had been trying to protect, often struggle to accommodate the kind of individual expertise and client relationships that drive success in knowledge-based industries. When managers prioritize their own authority over the strategic value that team members bring to client relationships, they create conflicts that ultimately damage both individual careers and organizational effectiveness. My success with the Strategic Partnerships division demonstrated an alternative approach, where individual expertise was recognized and empowered rather than constrained by traditional reporting structures. This didn't mean abandoning accountability or teamwork, but rather structuring organizations to maximize the value of specialized knowledge and relationship management skills. A year after the National Retail Federation keynote, I received a call that brought my professional journey full circle in the most unexpected way. The caller introduced himself as Marcus Webb, the new CEO of Pinnacle Consulting Group, a Dallas-based firm that specialized in retail technology implementations. "Ms. Carter, I've been following your work with strategic partnerships at TechFlow, and I'm impressed by the innovative approaches you've developed," Marcus said. "Pinnacle is looking to establish a strategic partnerships division similar to what you've built, and we'd like to discuss the possibility of your joining our leadership team to head that effort." The offer was flattering and professionally intriguing, but what made it particularly interesting was Marcus's next comment. "I should mention that we recently hired Rob Hayes as a senior project manager. Rob spoke very highly of your capabilities and actually recommended that we reach out to you about partnership opportunities." I was stunned. Rob Hayes, the man who had fired me publicly and accused me of insubordination, was now recommending me for a senior leadership position at his new company. The irony was almost overwhelming. "Rob recommended me?" I asked, needing to confirm that I'd heard correctly. "Yes, quite enthusiastically," Marcus replied. He said that despite some personality conflicts you'd had at TechFlow, he recognized that your strategic partnership expertise was exactly what Pinnacle needed to compete in the evolving market. He seemed to feel that your success with the RetailMax partnership demonstrated capabilities that would be valuable for our client base. After ending the call, I sat in my office reflecting on this unexpected development. Rob's recommendation suggested that his perspective on our conflicts had evolved significantly since his termination from TechFlow. Perhaps the experience of losing his job had given him time to reflect on what had really happened between us, and to recognize that his actions had been driven more by insecurity than by legitimate management concerns. I decided not to pursue the pinnacle opportunity, feeling that my work at TechFlow was too important and fulfilling to abandon. However, Rob's recommendation represented a form of acknowledgement that meant more to me than I had expected. It suggested that even someone who had been threatened by my success could eventually recognize its value and legitimacy. 2 years. After that humiliating night at the company retreat, the strategic partnerships division I'd built had become TechFlow's most profitable and fastest-growing business unit. We were managing 12 major strategic partnerships with a combined annual value of over $30 million. The RetailMax collaboration had evolved into a joint venture that was licensing our co-developed platform to retailers across North America. More importantly, the success of our partnership-focused approach had influenced TechFlow's entire organizational culture. The company had restructured several departments to better recognize and empower individual expertise, and Kate Morrison frequently cited our division as an example of how organizations could evolve to maximize the value of specialized knowledge and relationship management skills. The personal satisfaction I felt from this success went far beyond financial rewards or professional recognition. The experience had taught me that apparent setbacks could become catalysts for growth and innovation if approached with the right perspective and determination. Rob's decision to fire me had initially seemed like a career-ending disaster, but it had ultimately forced both me and TechFlow to confront fundamental questions about leadership, expertise, and organizational effectiveness. The resolution of those conflicts had created opportunities for growth and success that would never have been possible within the constraints of our previous working relationship. Most importantly, the experience had taught me that individual expertise and relationship management skills could be more valuable than traditional organizational authority when they were properly recognized and supported. This lesson had implications that extended far beyond my personal career, influencing how TechFlow approached client relationships and how other organizations in our industry thought about partnership development and strategic collaboration. The call that would change everything came on a Tuesday morning in March, exactly 2 years after that infamous company retreat. I was reviewing quarterly performance metrics for the Strategic Partnerships division when my assistant knocked on my door with an expression I'd learned to recognize as barely contained excitement. "Jen, you have a call from someone named Rebecca Thompson at Forbes magazine." What struck me most about the article was how it positioned the events at the company retreat as a catalyst for innovation, rather than simply a personal setback. Carter's public termination during a company retreat initially seemed like a career disaster, the article noted. But the incident forced both Carter and TechFlow to confront fundamental questions about expertise, authority, and organizational effectiveness that ultimately led to breakthrough innovations in client relationship management. The Forbes story's impact was immediate and far-reaching. Within hours of publication, I received calls from business school professors who wanted to develop case studies about our partnership model, from other consulting firms interested in licensing our approaches, and from potential clients who were eager to explore strategic partnerships with TechFlow. CNN's business news program called that afternoon, requesting an interview about the partnership revolution and its implications for the broader consulting industry. Harvard Business Review reached out about a follow-up article that would explore the academic framework underlying successful strategic partnerships. But the most meaningful response came from professionals throughout the business community who saw their own experiences reflected in my story. I received emails from executives who had faced similar conflicts between individual expertise and organizational authority, from consultants who were trying to build more collaborative client relationships, and from business leaders who were restructuring their organizations to better recognize and empower specialized knowledge. One email that particularly resonated with me came from a woman named Sarah Mitchell, a senior strategist at a major consulting firm in Chicago. "Your Forbes story made me realize that the conflicts I've been having with my manager aren't just personality issues," she wrote. They're fundamental disagreements about how expertise should be recognized and utilized within organizational structures. Your success gives me hope that these conflicts can lead to positive change rather than just career frustration. The national media attention also brought unexpected opportunities for strategic partnerships beyond what we'd previously imagined. Within 2 weeks of the Forbes publication, I received inquiries from Fortune 500 companies in industries ranging from healthcare to financial services, all interested in exploring how our partnership model could be applied to their strategic challenges. One particularly intriguing opportunity came from TechFlow Solutions, a multinational technology firm based in San Francisco that specialized in enterprise software development. Their CEO, Michael Chen, called personally to discuss how TechFlow's partnership approach might help Global Tech develop more collaborative relationships with their major clients. "We've read the Forbes article and studied your RetailMax case." "Study?" Michael explained during our initial conversation. "Global Tech has been struggling with the same issues you encountered at TechFlow, where our most successful client relationships are driven by individual expertise, but our organizational structure doesn't support or recognize those relationships effectively." The conversation led to a consulting engagement where I would spend 6 months helping Global Tech restructure their client relationship management practices based on the strategic partnership model we'd developed. The project would involve working with their senior leadership team to identify their most promising partnership opportunities and redesigning their organizational structure to support collaborative client relationships. The Global Tech engagement was fascinating and challenging in ways I hadn't anticipated. Unlike TechFlow, which was a mid-sized firm that could be restructured relatively quickly, Global Tech was a massive organization with thousands of employees, complex reporting structures, and established processes that had evolved over decades. The first phase of the project involved conducting extensive interviews with Global Tech's client-facing teams to identify where the partnership model could create the most value. What I discovered was a pattern remarkably similar to what I'd experienced with Rob at TechFlow, where talented relationship managers were constrained by hierarchical structures that prioritized organizational authority over individual expertise. One conversation that stood out was with Jennifer Walsh, a senior account manager who had built strong relationships with several of Global Tech's largest clients. "I've been advocating for a more collaborative approach with my key accounts for years," she told me during our interview. "But every time I propose partnership-style arrangements, my manager insists on maintaining traditional vendor-client boundaries. He's worried that too much collaboration will undermine his control over the relationship." Jennifer's situation was almost identical to what I'd faced with Rob, down to the manager's insecurity about individual team members developing direct relationships with senior client leadership. The difference was that Jennifer now had access to a proven alternative model and organizational support for implementing partnership-focused approaches. Working with Global Tech's leadership team to address these structural issues required careful navigation of organizational politics and entrenched interests. Some managers were enthusiastic about empowering their team members to develop strategic partnerships, while others were resistant to changes that might reduce their traditional authority. The breakthrough came when we identified 3 pilot partnerships where Global Tech could test the collaborative model with receptive clients. These partnerships would be managed by relationship leaders like Jennifer, who would have direct authority to make strategic decisions and develop long-term collaborative arrangements. The results of the pilot partnerships exceeded everyone's expectations. Within 6 months, all 3 relationships had evolved from traditional vendor arrangements into strategic collaborations that were generating significantly more revenue and creating innovative solutions that neither organization could have developed independently. More importantly, the success of the pilot partnerships convinced Global Tech's senior leadership that the partnership model represented a fundamental competitive advantage in their industry. They committed to restructuring their entire client relationship management approach based on the principles we'd developed. The Global Tech success story attracted additional attention from the business media and academic community. Harvard Business School invited me to guest lecture in their strategic management program, using the TechFlow and Global Tech case studies to illustrate how organizational structure could either enable or constrain strategic innovation. The lecture at Harvard was both exhilarating and intimidating. Standing in front of MBA students and faculty members at one of the world's most prestigious business schools, discussing concepts I'd developed through practical experience rather than academic theory, felt like the ultimate validation of my professional journey. During the Q&A session following my lecture, one student asked a question that captured the broader significance of what we'd accomplished. "Professor Carter, your partnership model seems to challenge some fundamental assumptions about how consulting firms and knowledge-based businesses should be organized. Do you think this represents a temporary competitive advantage or a permanent shift in how these industries will operate?" The question forced me to think about the long-term implications of what we'd learned through our successes with strategic partnerships. "I believe we're seeing the early stages of a fundamental transformation in how knowledge-based businesses create value," I replied. Traditional hierarchical organizations were designed for industrial-age companies where standardization and control were paramount. In knowledge-based industries, individual expertise and relationship management skills are often more valuable than organizational authority. I continued, "The partnership model works because it aligns organizational structure with the actual sources of value creation in knowledge-based businesses. Companies that can make this transition will have significant advantages over competitors that remain constrained by outdated organizational models." The Harvard lecture was recorded and later distributed through their business school network, extending the reach of our partnership concepts to business leaders and academics worldwide. Within 6 months, I was receiving invitations to speak at business schools and industry conferences across the country. One of the most significant speaking opportunities came from the annual Strategic Management Conference, where I was invited to deliver the keynote address on organizational innovation and competitive advantage. The audience included senior executives from Fortune 500 companies, management consultants, and academic researchers focused on strategic management. My keynote address, titled "Beyond Hierarchy: How Partnership Models Are Reshaping Knowledge-Based Industries," drew on case studies from TechFlow, Global Tech, and several other organizations that had successfully implemented collaborative partnership approaches. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with audience members describing the presentation as a roadmap for organizational transformation in the digital age. Following the keynote, I was approached by executives from companies in diverse industries who were interested in exploring how partnership models could be applied to their specific challenges. These conversations led to additional consulting engagements and speaking opportunities, establishing me as a recognized expert in strategic partnership development and organizational transformation. The most surprising opportunity came from an unexpected source. 6 months after the Strategic Management Conference keynote, I received a call from Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the Dean of Business at University of Texas at Austin. Kate Morrison, TechFlow's CEO, was her sister, and Elizabeth had been following my career development with interest. "Jen, I've been watching your evolution from successful consultant to thought leader in strategic partnerships," Elizabeth said during our conversation. "The University of Texas is looking to establish an executive education program focused on organizational innovation and strategic partnerships. We'd like you to consider joining our faculty as a professor of practice." The offer was intriguing and unexpected. Academic positions had never been part of my career planning, but the opportunity to teach and conduct research on strategic partnerships while maintaining my consulting practice appealed to me. The professor of practice position would allow me to continue working with TechFlow and other clients while contributing to academic understanding of organizational innovation. After extensive discussions with Elizabeth and other faculty members, I accepted the position and began developing curriculum for the executive education program. My courses would focus on strategic partnership development, organizational transformation, and the practical challenges of implementing collaborative business models. The academic appointment brought new opportunities to conduct research on partnership effectiveness and organizational innovation. Working with graduate students and faculty colleagues, I began developing more rigorous frameworks for understanding when and how partnership models created value for organizations. One research project that proved particularly valuable examined the long-term performance of companies that had implemented strategic partnership approaches compared to traditional consulting firms. The data showed significant advantages for partnership-focused organizations in terms of client retention, revenue growth, and employee satisfaction. These research findings provided academic validation for what I'd learned through practical experience, strengthening the credibility of partnership models and making them more accessible to organizations that needed empirical evidence before implementing significant structural changes. The combination of consulting practice, academic research, and public speaking created a platform for influence that extended far beyond what I could have achieved through traditional consulting work alone. I was now contributing to industry transformation at multiple levels, working directly with individual organizations while also shaping broader understanding of how knowledge-based businesses could evolve. 3 years after the Forbes cover story, the Strategic Partnerships division at TechFlow had grown to over 50 employees and was generating annual revenue exceeding $60 million. More importantly, our partnership model had influenced organizational changes at dozens of other companies, creating a ripple effect of innovation throughout the consulting industry. The academic program at UT had graduated over 200 executives, who had returned to their organizations with new understanding of how to implement collaborative partnership approaches. Many of these graduates had become advocates for organizational transformation within their own companies, extending the reach of partnership concepts far beyond my direct consulting work. The personal satisfaction I felt from this broader impact was profound. What had begun as a response to workplace conflict and professional crisis had evolved into a movement that was helping organizations and individuals throughout the business community recognize and utilize expertise more effectively. But perhaps the most meaningful validation came from an unexpected source. During a business school alumni event in Dallas, I was approached by a familiar face from my past, Tyler Hayes, Rob's son who had been caught in the middle of our workplace conflicts years earlier. Tyler was now working as a senior data analyst at a major consulting firm, having found his professional strength in technical analysis rather than client relationship management. "Jen, I wanted to thank you for how you handled the situation with my father and me at TechFlow," he said during our conversation. He continued, "At the time, I was confused and uncomfortable about being pushed into roles I wasn't ready for. Your approach of helping me find my actual strengths and interests made all the difference in my career development. I've been following your work on strategic partnerships, and it's inspired how I think about collaboration and expertise in my current role." Tyler's comments brought the story full circle in a way that felt deeply satisfying. The workplace conflicts that had seemed so destructive at the time had ultimately led not just to my own professional growth, but to positive outcomes for others who had been affected by those same conflicts. The transformation from public humiliation at a company retreat to national recognition as a thought leader in organizational innovation had been an extraordinary journey. But what made it most meaningful was knowing that the partnership model we'd developed was helping other professionals avoid the conflicts and constraints that had once seemed so limiting to my own career. The call that changed everything came 3 years later during a quarterly board meeting at TechFlow. I was presenting our Strategic Partnerships Division's performance metrics when Kate Morrison interrupted with news that would validate everything we'd built together. "Jen, I need to share something with the board that just happened," Kate announced, her voice carrying excitement I'd rarely heard. "Rob Hayes called me this morning from his new position at Pinnacle Consulting in Dallas. He's been following our success with strategic partnerships, and he wanted to formally apologize for his actions during the company retreat." The boardroom fell silent as Kate continued. "Rob acknowledged that firing you was the biggest mistake of his management career. He said watching TechFlow's growth and your national recognition made him realize he had been protecting his own insecurity rather than supporting genuine talent. But here's the remarkable part. Pinnacle has hired him specifically to implement partnership models based on your approach throughout their organization. The irony was breathtaking. The man who had publicly humiliated me for allegedly undermining his authority was now being paid to teach other companies the very principles I had developed. Rob's career recovery was built on recognizing and promoting the expertise he had, once tried to suppress. Kate's final comment brought the transformation full circle. Rob asked me to tell you that your success didn't just prove him wrong. It taught him what effective leadership actually looks like. He said the partnership model has become his template for empowering expertise rather than constraining it. Sometimes the people who hurt us most become our greatest validators when they finally understand what they almost destroyed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.